Hello, I am Sam Yogi. In this podcast, we will go through a talk given by J. Krishnamurti on July 9, 1933 in Alpino, Italy. And we will also discuss what he has talked about. J. Krishnamurti. Friends, before answering some of the questions that have been asked me, I shall give a brief talk concerning memory and time. When you meet an experience wholly, completely, without bias or prejudice, it leaves no scar of memory. Every one of you goes through experiences, and if you meet them completely with your whole being, then the mind is not caught up in the wave of memory. When your action is incomplete, when you do not meet an experience fully, but through the barriers of tradition, prejudice, or fear, then that action is followed by the gnawing of memory. So here Krishnamurti or K talks about certain barriers which limit action. Barriers like security, authority, postponement. Additionally, he states, as I just read, three other barriers: fear, tradition, and prejudice. How do these barriers, fear, tradition, authority, security, prejudice, postponement, limit action? They do, because we act within them. When we go through these barriers and meet life, our action becomes incomplete. For example, postponement limits action because what could have been done today is postponed. Thus, the action becomes incomplete. Or let's take the example of authority. Suppose we have a spiritual authority who tells us to breathe in a certain way. We do that breathing all our life. We call it pranayama, even though there could be a better way to breathe and do pranayama, which we will never know because we follow the spiritual authority and the book that he wrote with step by step instructions on how to do pranayama, which could be measly, insufficient, not very powerful, or even plain wrong. Why? The ayama or vistara or vistar or expansion of prana, which is the vital force, is pranayama. PRANAYAMA. For example, as it is taught in the markets today in India and in America, it is about YAMA, yama, or control of the prana, not expanding it to make it limitless. In other words, in Sanskrit, PRANAYAMA equates to PRANA plus AYAMA, pranayama. PRANA plus AYAMA, prana plus ayama. Ayama is not yama, ayama is a different dimension, it's expansion. But what the marketplace gurus have done is this: pranayama is prana plus yama yama. Yama means control. It is the first of the 8 limbs of yoga, the other 7 being niyama, asana, pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Going more into the details of pranayama is beyond the scope of this write-up. But you get the idea as to how spiritual authority as a barrier limits you. Now let's go back to what K says next. K. As long as there is this scar of memory, there must be the division of the time as past, present, and future. As long as the mind is tethered to the idea that action must be divided into the past, present, and future, there is identification through time, and therefore a continuity from which arises the fear of death, the fear of the loss of love. To understand timeless reality, timeless life, action must be complete. But you cannot become aware of this timeless reality by searching for it. You cannot acquire it by asking, how can I obtain this consciousness? So let's discuss this a little bit. K stated that when we do not meet an experience fully, but through the barriers of fear, postponement, authority, security, tradition, or prejudice, then that action is followed by the gnawing of memory. Let's take the example of fear. When we act out of fear, that action is fraught with conflict. We want to do a certain thing, but out of fear, we do something else, something incomplete. Suppose you are in a WhatsApp group and you start posting stuff, and the admin comes in and says, hey, I am discussing this. Don't post such stuff for a while. Now, do you post or do you not post? That's a conflict, and it's out of fear. Because if you post, he might remove you from the group. So you want to do a certain thing, but out of fear, you do something else, something incomplete. Because of conflict, it lingers as memory. It sticks to the mind. It is not forgotten as an action which was satisfactorily completed. You go back to it, and maybe in this example that I just gave, you adjust yourself and accept that yes, I will not post for a while and I will stay in the group, and thus try to complete the action. Now, I bring it out for better comprehension of memory and time, what K is going to say soon in this talk. When your action is born of incompleteness, then the memory of that action conditions the present. In other words, because of barriers, our past action, which was fraught with conflict, which was incomplete, further conditions the present, limits our action in the present, modifies our action in the present. This is what K implies when he says, as long as there is this scar of memory, there must be the division of time as past, present, and future. Thus, incomplete action in the past becomes a bummer for present action because it conditions the present action and probably makes the present action incomplete also, unless we can see through this rut through awareness. That is why K said at the very beginning of this talk, when you meet an experience wholly, completely, without bias or prejudice, It leaves no scar of memory. Every one of you goes through experiences, and if you meet them completely with your whole being, then the mind is not caught up in the wave of memory. When your action is incomplete, when you do not meet an experience fully, but through the barriers of tradition, prejudice, or fear, then that action is followed by the gnawing or the gnawing of memory. Now, how does K mean when he says, as long as the mind is tethered to the idea that action must be divided into the past, present, and future, there is identification through time and therefore a continuity from which arises the fear of death, the fear of the loss of love. On continuity, please refer to my blog if you are subscribing to it, written on August 8th. Today is August 10. So on August 8th, I wrote a blog in which I discussed continuity as mentioned by K in terms of proof that was given by Michael Newton, a spiritual hypnotist who took people through hypnosis into something called interlife. First, he will take them through hypnosis into a past life, and in the past life, he will progress them in time into the future and into death and into what is beyond death, which is the interlife between the past life and the present life. And in the interlife, he will ask them questions and they will answer. And I am not going to go into the details of that, but what he questions and how he questions and what they answer proves sufficiently that something survives, it continues beyond the physical death of the body and decides to come back to earth again into another body. Now, that's part of the blog, and continuity in this case means it exists beyond death. So, here K is saying there is identification through time and therefore a continuity from which arises the fear of death, death and rebirth. But before rebirth, there is death and there is fear of death. That is the greatest fear that human beings or even animals have on earth. And along with that, there is the fear of the loss of love. And all this is bound in time. So K says to understand the timeless reality, timeless life, action must be complete, not incomplete as we just discussed. But you cannot, he says, become aware of this timeless reality by searching for it. You cannot acquire it by asking, how can I obtain this consciousness? Now K goes on with this talk. K. Now, what is it that causes memory? What is it that prevents your acting completely, harmoniously, richly in every experience of life? Incomplete action arises when mind and heart are limited by hindrances, by barriers. If mind and heart are free, then you will meet every experience fully. But most of you are surrounded by barriers, the barriers of security, authority, fear, postponement. And since you have these barriers, you naturally act within them, and therefore you are unable to act completely. But when you become aware of these barriers, when you become aware with your heart and mind in the midst of a crisis, that awareness frees your mind without effort from the barriers that have been preventing your complete action. So we end the podcast here for today, and we'll continue with this talk in the next podcast.